The morning sun cast golden rays across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace. Tourists gathered behind the velvet ropes, cameras ready, hoping to capture the perfect photograph of the famous royal guards. These soldiers stood perfectly still in their distinctive red uniforms and tall bearskin hats, their faces expressionless as stone. Among the crowd stood a young man named Marcus Thompson, barely 20 years old. He wore expensive designer clothes and carried himself with an air of superiority that made others step aside. Marcus had flown in from California with his wealthy parents, but unlike other visitors who showed respect and wonder, he seemed annoyed by everything around him. His father owned several tech companies, and Marcus had grown up never hearing the word no. Money solved every problem in his world, and he believed rules were meant for ordinary people, not for someone like him. As he scrolled through his phone, barely glancing at the historic palace before him, his mother nudged him to take a picture. Marcus rolled his eyes and pocketed his phone. He noticed how everyone maintained a respectful distance from the guards, whispering and pointing but never crossing the invisible boundary of proper behavior. A small smirk formed on his lips. He had always enjoyed pushing boundaries, testing limits, seeing how far he could go before facing consequences. The guard closest to him was a tall man in his early 30s named William Carter. William had served in the British Army for 12 years, including 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had earned multiple commendations for bravery and dedication. Standing guard at the palace was an honor he took seriously, representing not just the military but the entire nation. William had seen countless tourists during his duty. Most were respectful, some were curious, and a few tried to make the guards laugh or react. He had mastered the art of remaining completely still, his mind focused, his breathing controlled. Nothing disturbed his composure. Marcus stepped closer to the rope barrier, eyeing William with a calculating expression. Other tourists noticed and began whispering among themselves, sensing something was about to happen. A family from Japan moved their children back slightly, and an elderly British couple shook their heads in anticipation of trouble. Without warning, Marcus ducked under the velvet rope and walked directly toward William. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Several people called out warnings, but Marcus ignored them all. He stopped just inches from the guard's face, staring up at him with a challenging grin. William's eyes remained fixed straight ahead, not acknowledging the young man's presence. His training had prepared him for this exact situation. The protocol was clear: remain motionless, maintain discipline, and trust that security personnel would handle any disturbances. Marcus waved his hand in front of William's face. Nothing. He snapped his fingers near the guard's ear. Still nothing. The crowd watched in horrified fascination, some filming the encounter on their phones while others looked around for security officers. Emboldened by the lack of response, Marcus began making faces at William, contorting his features into exaggerated expressions. He stuck out his tongue and crossed his eyes, behaving like a child rather than a grown man. Some teenagers in the crowd laughed nervously, but most people looked uncomfortable with the display. Marcus's mother called out from behind the rope, her voice tight with embarrassment. She had hoped this trip to London would help her son mature, show him different cultures, and teach him respect. Instead, he was proving every negative stereotype about spoiled American tourists. Her husband stood beside her, his face red, torn between pride in his son's boldness and shame at his lack of manners. William felt a bead of sweat form on his temple, not from the encounter itself, but from the warm wool of his uniform under the morning sun. His legs ached from standing in the same position for nearly 40 minutes. But physical discomfort was nothing compared to the mental discipline required to ignore someone actively trying to provoke a reaction. Marcus pulled out his phone and began taking selfies with William, making peace signs and silly faces while positioning himself directly in front of the guard. He posted one immediately to his social media with the caption, "These guys are basically statues. Watch this." Within seconds, his friends back home began commenting and sharing. The crowd had grown larger now, drawn by the commotion. A young girl, perhaps 8 years old, tugged on her father's sleeve and asked why the man was being so mean to the soldier. Her father had no good answer. He simply held her hand tighter and hoped security would arrive soon. Marcus decided to escalate further. He began tapping on William's chest, first gently, then harder, as if testing whether the guard was real or some kind of mannequin. Each tap felt like a small violation of the boundaries William had sworn to maintain. But still he did not move. His breathing remained steady, his gaze forward, his jaw set. A security officer had been alerted and was making his way through the crowd, but Marcus was too absorbed in his performance to notice. He had become the center of attention, and that was exactly where he loved to be. He turned to face the crowd, spreading his arms wide as if to say, "See? I can do whatever I want." That moment of arrogance would prove to be a turning point, though Marcus did not know it yet. Behind him, William's mind was working through the situation with military precision. He had dealt with far worse threats than an entitled young man seeking attention. This was merely another test of his resolve, another challenge to overcome with dignity and grace. Marcus turned back to William and made one final attempt to break the guard's composure. He leaned in close and began speaking directly into William's ear, saying crude jokes and insults, trying desperately to get any kind of reaction. His breath smelled of the coffee he had drunk earlier, and his cologne was overpowering at such close range. Still, William did not flinch. Inside he was counting, not seconds or minutes but breaths. Each inhale and exhale kept him centered, kept him focused on his duty rather than the irritation before him. He had learned this technique during his military training, and it had served him well in far more dangerous situations than this. The security officer was now pushing through the final layer of crowd, his hand on his radio calling for backup, but before he could reach Marcus, something unexpected happened. Something that would change the entire tone of the encounter and leave everyone present with a memory they would never forget. A small child broke free from his mother's grip and ran toward Marcus and William. The boy, no more than 5 years old, had been watching the entire scene with wide, confused eyes. His name was Oliver, and he had been dreaming about seeing the palace guards for weeks. His bedroom back in Manchester was decorated with toy soldiers, and he had practiced standing still like a guard every night before bed. Oliver's mother lunged forward to catch him, but he was surprisingly quick for such a small child. He slipped past several tourists and ducked under the rope, following the same path Marcus had taken. But unlike Marcus, Oliver's intention was not to mock or disturb. He simply wanted to be close to his hero. Marcus, still absorbed in his attempts to provoke William, did not notice the child approaching from behind. Oliver walked right up to the guard and stood beside him, mimicking his posture as best as his tiny body could manage. He straightened his back, lifted his chin, and stared forward with intense concentration. The crowd's energy shifted immediately. What had been uncomfortable tension transformed into collective warmth. Phones that had been recording Marcus's disrespectful behavior now captured Oliver's innocent admiration. Parents smiled, and even those who had been angry at Marcus found themselves softening at the sight of the small boy trying so hard to stand like a soldier. Marcus finally noticed the child and turned around, his expression shifting from arrogance to confusion. For the first time since arriving at the palace, he was not the center of attention. A 5-year-old had upstaged him simply by being genuine and respectful. Oliver's mother reached the rope barrier, calling for her son in a panicked whisper. She was mortified that he had crossed the line, but she could also see that his intentions were pure. Security personnel who had been rushing to remove Marcus now paused, unsure how to handle the situation with a small child involved. William, who had remained stoic through all of Marcus's provocations, felt something shift inside him. The child's presence was different. There was no mockery, no disrespect, just pure admiration from a little boy who saw him as someone worth emulating. For the first time in several minutes, William's focus was challenged not by annoyance but by emotion. Marcus stood there awkwardly, suddenly aware of how foolish he must look compared to the innocent child. His expensive clothes and confident posture seemed hollow next to Oliver's simple joy. Some of the teenagers who had been laughing at Marcus's antics now turned away, feeling secondhand embarrassment. Oliver began to wobble slightly, his little legs not used to standing so perfectly still. He bit his lip in concentration, determined not to disappoint the guard he was standing beside. A tiny bead of sweat formed on his forehead and his small hands clenched into fists at his sides. The crowd held its collective breath. Even Marcus found himself watching the child rather than continuing his performance. Something about Oliver's determination cut through the noise and chaos, creating a moment of unexpected beauty in the midst of what had been an ugly display. William could see the child from his peripheral vision. Every fiber of his being wanted to break protocol, to reach down and steady the boy to tell him he was doing wonderfully. But his duty held him in place. Yet something extraordinary began to happen inside the seasoned soldier's heart. The security officer finally reached Marcus and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Marcus jerked in surprise, suddenly remembering where he was and what he had been doing. The officer's voice was low but stern, instructing Marcus to step back behind the rope immediately. There was no room for argument in his tone. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, to explain that he had money and influence, that his father could make things difficult for anyone who touched him. But the words died in his throat. For the first time in his privileged life, he felt genuinely ashamed. Not because he was being reprimanded, but because he was being upstaged by a child who understood respect better than he did. The officer guided Marcus back toward the rope barrier. But before they had taken 3 steps, something remarkable happened. William Carter, the guard who had remained perfectly still through insults, provocations, and disrespect, did something unexpected. He moved. It was not a large movement, nothing dramatic or sudden. But everyone who had been watching noticed immediately. William's right hand, which had been holding his rifle in perfect position, shifted ever so slightly. Then, with careful precision, he adjusted his stance and looked down. His eyes met Oliver's, and for just a moment, the stern military bearing softened. A hint of a smile touched the corner of William's mouth, so brief that anyone blinking might have missed it. But it was there, unmistakable and genuine. Then William did something that made the entire crowd gasp in delight. He gave Oliver the smallest, most subtle nod of approval. It was a gesture that said more than words ever could. "You did well, young soldier. You showed respect and honor." Oliver's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. His eyes went wide with joy and a huge smile spread across his features. He had received acknowledgement from his hero, and in that moment nothing else in the world mattered. He did not jump or shout or celebrate wildly. Instead, he maintained his posture and returned the nod with equal seriousness, a small soldier acknowledging his superior officer. The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed and videos were shared instantly across social media. But this time the attention was not on arrogance or disrespect. It was on a touching moment between a dedicated soldier and an admiring child. A moment that reminded everyone present why these guards deserved honor and appreciation. Marcus stood frozen behind the rope, his hand still gripped by the security officer. He watched the scene unfold with an expression that was difficult to read. The applause that should have been for him, the attention he had craved, was being given to a 5-year-old boy who had simply shown kindness and respect. Oliver's mother finally managed to collect her son, apologizing profusely to everyone around her. But the other tourists assured her there was nothing to apologize for. Her son had created a beautiful moment, they told her. He had shown them all what true admiration looked like. As Oliver was led back behind the rope, he kept looking back at William, waving shyly. William had returned to his rigid stance, his face once again expressionless, his eyes forward. But everyone who had witnessed the exchange knew something special had just occurred. The security officer released Marcus with a warning. He was told that if he crossed the barrier again or showed any further disrespect, he would be removed from the palace grounds entirely and possibly face legal consequences. Marcus nodded silently, unable to find his usual confident comebacks. His parents approached him, their faces showing a mixture of disappointment and concern. His mother's eyes were damp with unshed tears, not of sadness but of shame at how her son had behaved. His father, usually quick to defend Marcus's actions, remained silent, his jaw tight. Marcus felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. It took him a moment to identify the emotion, because he had experienced it so rarely in his protected, privileged life. It was regret, genuine and uncomfortable, settling over him like a heavy blanket. The crowd began to disperse, though many continued to discuss what they had witnessed. The story would spread far beyond the palace walls, shared in hotels and restaurants, posted online, and recounted to friends and family back home. But the story being shared was not about the arrogant young man who tried to break a guard's composure. It was about the little boy who showed everyone the true meaning of respect, and the soldier who acknowledged it with grace. Marcus walked away from the palace with his parents, but his mind remained trapped in that courtyard. He could not shake the image of little Oliver standing beside the guard, or the warmth in William's eyes when he acknowledged the child. That brief moment of connection had revealed something Marcus had been missing his entire life, though he could not yet name what it was. His mother remained silent during the taxi ride back to their hotel. She stared out the window at the London streets, her disappointment radiating like heat from a fire. His father checked emails on his phone, his usual escape when family matters became uncomfortable. Marcus sat between them, feeling smaller than he had in years. Back at the luxury hotel, Marcus retreated to his room. He threw himself onto the king-sized bed and stared at the ornate ceiling. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications from his social media posts, but for once he did not reach for it. The validation he usually craved from likes and comments felt hollow and meaningless. He kept replaying the morning in his mind. He saw himself through the eyes of the crowd, through the lens of all those camera phones. He had looked ridiculous, childish, desperate for attention. And when real innocence appeared in the form of Oliver, Marcus's performance had been exposed for what it truly was: empty arrogance masking deep insecurity. That evening, Marcus could not eat dinner. His parents tried to engage him in conversation about their plans for the next day, but he responded with single syllables. His mother suggested they visit the Tower of London. His father recommended a shopping trip to Harrods, but nothing sparked Marcus's interest. His mind kept drifting back to the palace, to William's unwavering dignity, to Oliver's pure admiration. Later that night, alone in his room, Marcus did something he had not done in months. He opened his laptop and began researching instead of scrolling through entertainment. He searched for information about the Royal Guards, their training, their history, their service. He discovered that these soldiers were not just ceremonial figures standing still for tourists. They were active military personnel who had served in combat zones, protected lives, and sacrificed comfort and safety for duty. William Carter's name appeared in one article about decorated veterans who had served in Afghanistan. Marcus read about a mission where William had carried a wounded comrade through hostile territory for 3 miles, refusing to leave him behind despite coming under fire multiple times. He had received a medal for valor, but when interviewed, William had simply said he was doing his job, protecting those who could not protect themselves. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he read. While he had been attending private schools and exclusive parties, complaining about which luxury car his parents should buy him next, men like William had been risking their lives for strangers. The contrast was so stark it physically hurt to acknowledge. He found a video online that had been posted just hours earlier. It showed the entire encounter from that morning, capturing every embarrassing moment of Marcus's behavior, followed by Oliver's sweet interaction with William. The comment section was brutal. People called Marcus entitled, disrespectful, and a disgrace, but they praised Oliver as the future of good manners, and William as the embodiment of professional excellence. One comment in particular struck Marcus deeply. It was from a woman who identified herself as a veteran. This young man tried to break a soldier's spirit for entertainment, not understanding that spirit has been forged in fire far hotter than his petty provocations. Then a child showed what this fool should have known from the start. Respect is earned by those who serve, not mocked by those who've been served everything. Marcus closed his laptop and sat in darkness. The luxury around him, the expensive furnishings and high-end amenities, suddenly felt suffocating. He had everything money could buy, yet Oliver, with his simple joy and genuine respect, had created a moment more valuable than anything in Marcus's possession. Sleep did not come easily that night. Marcus tossed and turned, his mind racing with unfamiliar thoughts. He kept seeing William's face that moment when the guard's military bearing softened for Oliver. There had been such warmth there, such humanity underneath the discipline. Marcus wondered if anyone had ever looked at him with that kind of genuine respect and affection, not because of his family's money or his social status, but because of who he truly was. The next morning, Marcus woke early. He showered and dressed carefully, choosing simple clothes instead of his usual designer labels. His parents were surprised when he appeared for breakfast, even more surprised when he announced he wanted to return to Buckingham Palace. His father assumed Marcus wanted revenge or to cause more trouble. His mother's face showed concern and fear, but Marcus shook his head and said something that shocked them both. "I need to apologize," The taxi ride back to the palace felt longer than the previous day. Marcus's hands were sweaty and his heart pounded in his chest. He had apologized before, of course, but always half-heartedly. Always because someone forced him to. Never because he genuinely felt remorse. This was different. This feeling of needing to make things right was completely foreign to him. When they arrived at the palace, Marcus asked his parents to wait outside the gates. They reluctantly agreed, though his mother insisted he stay where she could see him. Marcus approached the courtyard slowly, scanning the guards on duty. His heart sank when he did not immediately see William. Perhaps the guard had a different shift, or perhaps he was stationed elsewhere that day. The tourists today seemed different to Marcus, or perhaps he was seeing them differently. He noticed how most people kept a respectful distance, how parents taught their children to admire without disturbing, how visitors from all over the world came together in appreciation of tradition and service. He had been blind to all of this yesterday, seeing only an opportunity for attention. Marcus stood behind the rope barrier for over an hour, watching the guards, studying their discipline and dedication. He saw how they endured the heat, the physical strain, the occasional ignorant tourist who tested their patience. Not one of them faltered. Not one of them broke their composure. Then finally he saw William. The guard was walking toward his position for the changing of the guard ceremony. Marcus's mouth went dry. This was his chance, but he had no idea what to say or how to approach the situation appropriately. William took his position at the same spot where the incident had occurred the previous day. He stood tall and straight, his rifle held precisely, his face expressionless. If he noticed Marcus in the crowd, he gave no indication. Marcus waited until the ceremony was complete and the crowds began to thin. He knew he could not approach William while he was on active duty. That would be repeating yesterday's mistake. Instead, Marcus approached one of the security officers, the same one who had escorted him away the day before. The officer recognized Marcus immediately, and his expression hardened. Marcus raised his hands in a gesture of peace and spoke quietly, respectfully. He explained that he wanted to apologize to the guard he had disrespected, that he understood it needed to be done properly, and that he was willing to wait or follow whatever protocol was necessary. The security officer studied Marcus carefully, looking for signs of mockery or another publicity stunt, but something in the young man's eyes must have convinced him because he nodded slowly. He explained that guards could not be approached during duty, but that he would relay the message during the next break. Marcus thanked him sincerely and stepped back. He found a bench away from the main tourist areas and sat down to wait. His phone buzzed with messages from friends asking about his viral video, brands wanting to sponsor his social media, news outlets requesting interviews. He ignored them all. None of that mattered anymore. An hour passed, then another. Marcus's parents called twice asking when he would be done. He told them he did not know, but that he needed to do this. His mother, hearing something new in his voice, told him they would wait as long as necessary. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to lower in the sky, the security officer approached Marcus. He gestured for the young man to follow him, leading him to a side entrance away from public view. Marcus's heart raced as he walked through corridors he had only seen in photographs, past paintings of royalty and history he had never bothered to appreciate. They stopped at a small office where William Carter sat, now out of uniform and in regular military dress. The guard looked up as Marcus entered, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp and assessing. Marcus stood in the doorway, suddenly aware of how unprepared he was for this moment. All the words he had rehearsed during his wait evaporated from his mind. William Carter sat behind a simple desk, still wearing his military bearing even in casual dress. The small office felt charged with unspoken tension. The security officer excused himself, closing the door behind him. Marcus was alone with the man he had humiliated, and the weight of that reality pressed down on his shoulders. William gestured to a chair across from the desk, a silent invitation to sit. Marcus moved forward slowly and lowered himself into the seat, feeling like a student called to the principal's office. For a long moment, neither man spoke. William simply looked at Marcus with those steady, assessing eyes, the same eyes that had remained focused and unwavering through yesterday's provocation. But now, without the ceremony and the crowd, Marcus could see more in them. There was intelligence there and strength and something else that surprised him. Patience. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice coming out rougher than intended. He began to speak, stumbling over words, starting sentences and abandoning them. Finally, he took a deep breath and forced himself to slow down, to speak clearly and honestly. He apologized. Not the empty, casual apology he usually offered when caught doing something wrong, but a real one. He told William that his behavior had been inexcusable, disrespectful, and ignorant. He explained that he had spent his life believing rules did not apply to him, that money and status exempted him from basic decency. He admitted that seeing Oliver, seeing the child's genuine respect contrasted with his own mockery, had broken something open inside him. William listened without interrupting, his expression unchanging. When Marcus finally finished, falling silent and staring at his hands, the guard remained quiet for another moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was not harsh or angry as Marcus had expected. It was calm, measured, carrying the weight of someone who had seen far more of life than the young man before him. William told Marcus that he had encountered many people like him during his years of service. Tourists who saw the guards as entertainment, as statues or props for their amusement rather than soldiers performing a duty. He explained that he had learned long ago not to take such behavior personally, because it said nothing about him and everything about those who engaged in it. But then William's expression shifted slightly, a hint of something warmer entering his eyes. He told Marcus that what happened with Oliver had been one of the most touching moments of his career. That child's pure admiration and respect had reminded William why he wore the uniform, why he stood in the heat and cold, why he maintained discipline even when tested. Marcus felt tears prickling at his eyes, surprising himself. He could not remember the last time he had cried, certainly not in front of a stranger. But sitting across from this man who had every right to be angry with him, who instead spoke with such dignity and grace, something inside Marcus began to crack open. William asked Marcus a question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Why do you think you behaved that way?" Marcus struggled to answer. He started with excuses about being bored, about not thinking it was a big deal, about just having fun. But William's steady gaze made it impossible to hide behind those shallow explanations. Finally, Marcus admitted the truth he had been avoiding. He confessed that he had spent his whole life being given everything except genuine attention from the people who mattered. His parents showered him with money but rarely had time for real conversations. His friends valued his connections and resources, not him as a person. Teachers and staff at his schools treated him with careful politeness because of his family's donations. He had learned to seek attention any way he could get it, even if that meant being outrageous or disrespectful, because negative attention felt better than being invisible. William nodded slowly, and for the first time his expression softened completely. He told Marcus that he understood feeling invisible. He spoke about growing up in a working-class neighborhood, about joining the military partly to prove himself, to show that he was worth something. He had learned through years of service that true respect cannot be demanded or bought. It must be earned through actions, through sacrifice, through showing up day after day and doing the work that needs doing. The guard shared a story from his time in Afghanistan. He spoke about a young soldier under his command, a kid barely older than Marcus who had come from wealth and privilege. This soldier had joined the military to escape his family's expectations, to find something real in a world that felt false. At first he had struggled, clashing with authority, unable to adapt to the discipline required, but slowly, through the work and the challenges and the shared hardship of service, that young soldier had transformed. He had learned that he was capable of far more than he had ever imagined. He had discovered that the greatest satisfaction came not from taking but from giving, not from being served but from serving others. By the end of his tour, he had become one of William's finest soldiers, not because of where he came from, but because of who he chose to become. Marcus listened intently, understanding that William was not just telling a story but offering a mirror. He could see himself in that young soldier, could see both who he was now and who he might become. The question was whether he had the courage to make that change. William leaned forward, his voice gentle but firm. He told Marcus that yesterday's behavior could not be undone, but it also did not have to define him. Everyone makes mistakes, acts foolishly, does things they regret. What matters is what comes next, what lessons are learned, what changes are made. He challenged Marcus to think about what kind of person he wanted to be. Did he want to continue being someone people tolerated because of his money? Or did he want to become someone people respected because of his character? Did he want to take up space in the world thoughtlessly? Or did he want to contribute something meaningful? Marcus felt overwhelmed by the weight of these questions. No one had ever challenged him this way before. People either indulged him or condemned him, but no one had treated him as someone capable of genuine growth and change. William was offering him something precious, the belief that he could be better. The guard stood up and extended his hand across the desk. Marcus rose quickly and shook it, feeling the firm grip of someone who knew his own strength and used it carefully. William told Marcus that his apology was accepted, but more importantly, that Marcus should make sure his future actions matched his words. As Marcus turned to leave, William called him back. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small card, handing it to Marcus. It was contact information for a veterans organization that worked with young people, offering mentorship and guidance. William suggested that if Marcus was serious about changing, about understanding service and sacrifice, he might consider volunteering there. Marcus took the card with trembling hands, nodding his thanks. He left the office in a daze, walking through the palace corridors without really seeing them. His mind was spinning with everything William had said, with the possibilities that had been opened, with the challenge that had been laid before him. When Marcus emerged and rejoined his parents, they immediately noticed the change in him. His face was different somehow, softer and more open. His eyes were red, suggesting he had been crying, but there was also a new clarity in them. His mother reached out tentatively, touching his arm, asking if he was all right. Marcus nodded and did something he had not done since he was a small child. He hugged his mother tightly, really hugged her, not the brief, awkward embrace he usually offered. He told her he was sorry for being such a difficult son, for embarrassing her, for taking so much for granted. His mother's eyes filled with tears as she held him, feeling like she had gotten a piece of her little boy back. His father watched this exchange with discomfort, not knowing how to process this emotional display. But even he could see that something fundamental had shifted in his son. Marcus was not just apologizing for yesterday's incident. He was apologizing for years of behavior, for the person he had been. That evening, back at the hotel, Marcus did not retreat to his room. Instead, he sat with his parents in the common area and talked, really talked for the first time in years. He told them about his conversation with William, about the challenge he had been given, about wanting to change but not knowing how. His mother cried openly now, admitting that she and his father had been so focused on giving Marcus material comfort that they had neglected to teach him about purpose and meaning. His father, usually so confident and assured, looked uncomfortable but also thoughtful.
He admitted that he had raised his son the way he himself had been raised,
with the belief that success and money were all that mattered. They talked late into the night, discussing mistakes and regrets, hopes and possibilities. It was not a magical fix. Years of habits and patterns could not be changed in one conversation. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had separated them, allowing light to finally seep through. Marcus spent the rest of his London trip seeing the city through completely different eyes. He visited museums and actually read the plaques, learning about history and sacrifice. He walked through memorial gardens dedicated to fallen soldiers, reading names and thinking about the lives behind them. He observed people, really observed them, noticing acts of kindness and service he would have been blind to just days before. One afternoon, Marcus returned to Buckingham Palace, but this time he stayed far back in the crowd. He watched the changing of the guard ceremony with new appreciation, understanding now the dedication required to perform those precise movements, to maintain that discipline. When he saw William take his position, Marcus did not try to get his attention. He simply watched with respect, one observer among many. Before leaving London, Marcus made one more visit to the palace. He brought with him a letter he had written and rewritten a dozen times. In it, he thanked William not just for accepting his apology, but for challenging him to be better. He gave the letter to the same security officer who had facilitated their meeting, asking him to pass it along. The flight back to California felt different than the journey to London. Marcus sat by the window watching clouds drift past, thinking about the person he had been when he boarded the plane going east. That Marcus felt like a stranger now, someone shallow and lost, stumbling through life without purpose or direction. When they landed in Los Angeles, Marcus did not immediately fall back into his old routines. He looked at the card William had given him, at the contact information for the Veterans Organization. For 3 days he carried it in his pocket, taking it out and staring at it, building up courage. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon, Marcus made the call. A woman named Sarah answered, her voice warm and professional. Marcus stumbled through his explanation, saying he was interested in volunteering but had no experience or skills to offer. Sarah laughed kindly and told him that willingness to help was the only skill required to start. The Veterans Center was located in a modest building in a working-class neighborhood, far from Marcus's usual haunts. When he arrived for his first volunteer shift, he felt completely out of place. His designer clothes and expensive car marked him as an outsider among the veterans and their families who gathered there. Sarah, the woman he had spoken to on the phone, greeted him at the door. She was in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and sharp, kind eyes that seemed to see right through him. She gave him a tour of the facility, explaining the various programs they offered: job placement assistance, counseling services, community meals, and youth mentorship. Marcus was assigned to help in the community kitchen, preparing and serving meals to veterans and their families. His first instinct was to protest, to say he did not know how to cook, that surely there was something more suited to his skills. But he remembered William's challenge and bit back the complaints. He put on an apron and listened to the instructions. Working in that kitchen was harder than anything Marcus had ever done. The other volunteers, many of them retired or working-class people who had been serving for years, moved with practiced efficiency. Marcus fumbled with vegetables, burned rice, and generally got in the way. But no one mocked him or complained. They simply showed him how to do things correctly and trusted him to learn. One of his fellow volunteers was a man named Tom, a Vietnam veteran in his 70s who moved slowly but worked steadily. Tom noticed Marcus's frustration and pulled him aside during a break. He told Marcus that everyone starts somewhere, that the key is showing up and trying, even when it is hard. Tom shared his own story of coming home from war feeling lost and angry, unable to connect with the life he had left behind. It took him years to find purpose again, to understand that healing came through helping others. He had been volunteering at the center for 20 years now, and it had saved his life more surely than any medal or recognition. Marcus listened, really listened, in a way he had never done before. He asked Tom questions about his service, about what he had learned, about how he had found peace. The older man answered honestly, sharing both the painful memories and the hard-won wisdom. By the end of their conversation, Marcus felt like he had been given a precious gift, someone's genuine life experience, offered without expectation of anything in return. Over the following weeks, Marcus continued to volunteer at the center. He worked in the kitchen, helped organize donated supplies, and assisted with administrative tasks. Slowly, almost without noticing, he began to change. His hands, which had never done physical work, developed calluses. His schedule, once filled with parties and meaningless activities, now revolved around his volunteer shifts. His old friends noticed the change and did not like it. They sent messages asking where he had been, why he was ignoring invitations, what was wrong with him. Marcus tried to explain, but they did not understand. To them, he had simply become boring, trading fun for some kind of weird charity work. One by one, those friendships faded. Marcus felt the loss, but he also felt relief. Those relationships had been built on superficial foundations, and now that he was changing, there was nothing left to sustain them. He was learning that real friendship required more than shared entertainment. It required shared values and mutual respect. At home, the changes in Marcus created tension with his father. The older man had expected his son to join the family business after this phase passed, to take his place in the corporate world where money and success were the measures of worth. But Marcus was discovering that he wanted something different, though he could not yet articulate exactly what. His mother, however, supported the change. She saw her son becoming someone she could be proud of, someone with depth and purpose. She started volunteering at the center herself, working alongside Marcus in the kitchen. These shared hours of service became the foundation of a relationship they had never managed to build through all their years of material abundance. 3 months after returning from London, Marcus received an unexpected email. It was from William Carter. The guard had been given Marcus's letter and wanted to reach out. He wrote that he had been following Marcus's journey through Sarah at the Veterans Center, who happened to be William's aunt. He congratulated Marcus on his dedication and invited him to continue their conversation over video call. That video call became a regular occurrence. Every few weeks, Marcus and William would connect across the time zones. William became a mentor, offering guidance and challenge in equal measure. He never let Marcus off easy, always pushing him to think deeper, to do more, to be better. William suggested that Marcus consider more formal education in social work or counseling, fields where he could use his experience to help others who struggled with privilege and purpose. The idea took root in Marcus's mind. He began researching programs, imagining a future where his life had meaning beyond his family's wealth. At the Veterans Center, Marcus was given more responsibility. He began helping with the youth mentorship program, working with teenagers who, like him, came from troubled backgrounds. Many of them were from poor neighborhoods rather than wealthy ones, but they shared his sense of being lost, of not knowing their place in the world. Marcus found that he could connect with these young people in ways the other volunteers could not. He understood the anger, the need to prove oneself, the desperate seeking for attention and validation. He could speak to them honestly about his own failures and the long, difficult journey toward change. One teenager in particular, a 16-year-old named David, reminded Marcus painfully of himself. David was smart but angry, lashing out at anyone who tried to help him, convinced that the world owed him something better than what he had. Other mentors had given up on him, but Marcus persisted. He told David his own story, including the humiliating incident at Buckingham Palace. He showed him the viral videos that still circulated online, letting David see the worst of him. Then he explained what had changed, how meeting William and Oliver had cracked open something essential inside him. David listened skeptically at first, his arms crossed, his expression hostile. But as Marcus continued, sharing not just the transformation but the ongoing struggle, the daily choice to be better, something shifted in the teenager's eyes. For the first time, he saw someone who understood him, who had been where he was and found a way out. That connection became the foundation of David's own transformation. It was slow and difficult, with setbacks and failures along the way. But Marcus stayed consistent, showing up week after week, offering the kind of patient presence that William had shown him. On the 6-month anniversary of that fateful day in London, Marcus wrote another letter to William. This one was different from the first. It was not an apology but a thank you, an acknowledgement of how profoundly that brief encounter had changed his life. He told William about David and the other young people he was helping, about his plans for future education, about the person he was becoming. A year after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Marcus received surprising news. William Carter was coming to California as part of a speaking tour about military service and veterans issues. He would be visiting several cities, including Los Angeles, and wanted to meet Marcus in person. Marcus felt nervous excitement building in his chest. William had become such an important figure in his life, a mentor and guide through his transformation. But their relationship had existed entirely through screens and written words. Meeting face-to-face felt momentous, like a test he desperately wanted to pass. The Veterans Center agreed to host William for an evening presentation. Marcus threw himself into organizing the event, coordinating with Sarah and the other volunteers to make sure everything was perfect. He wanted to show William what his challenge had created, the ripples that had spread from that one conversation in a small palace office. The night of the event, the center was packed. Veterans, their families, volunteers, and community members filled every available seat. Marcus stood at the back of the room, his palms sweating, watching the door. When William finally entered, Marcus felt a rush of emotion that surprised him with its intensity. William looked different in civilian clothes, more relaxed than he had in uniform, but his bearing was still unmistakably military. His eyes scanned the room and found Marcus immediately. The guard smiled, a genuine warm expression that made Marcus's throat tighten with unexpected tears. They shook hands, and William pulled Marcus into a brief embrace. No words were needed in that moment. The growth, the work, the transformation, All of it was acknowledged in that simple gesture of respect and affection. William's presentation was powerful. He spoke about service and sacrifice, about finding purpose through helping others, about the invisible wounds that veterans carry, and the importance of community support. His words resonated through the room, and Marcus watched the faces around him, seeing the same impact William had made on him reflected in others. After the formal presentation, William asked Marcus to join him on stage. Marcus's heart pounded as he walked to the front of the room. William introduced him to the audience, explaining that they had met under unusual circumstances and that Marcus represented the potential for change that exists in everyone. Then William did something that shocked Marcus. He invited little Oliver and his family to join them on stage. They had flown in from Manchester as a surprise, coordinated secretly by William and Sarah. Oliver was bigger now, his face showing the changes of a year's growth, but his eyes still held that same bright admiration. The audience erupted in applause, many recognizing the trio from the viral video that had touched so many hearts. Marcus felt overwhelmed, surrounded by the two people who had unknowingly collaborated to change his life. The guard who showed him dignity and the child who showed him respect. William explained to the audience that Oliver had been following Marcus's journey through social media and news stories about the Veterans Center. The boy had written letters to William, asking about the changed man and whether people could really become better. William had used those questions to teach Oliver about forgiveness, growth, and the human capacity for transformation. Oliver approached Marcus shyly, extending his small hand. Marcus shook it solemnly, then knelt down to the boy's level. He thanked Oliver for being such a good example, for showing him what real respect looked like. Oliver smiled and said something that made Marcus's eyes fill with tears. "You're like a soldier too now, helping people." The evening concluded with a reception where Marcus introduced William to the veterans and young people he had been working with. William spent time with each of them, offering encouragement and wisdom. He paid particular attention to David, the angry teenager who Marcus had taken under his wing. William and David talked for nearly an hour, the guard sharing stories from his own troubled youth, before military service gave him structure and purpose. David listened with an intensity Marcus recognized, the same desperate hunger for guidance and meaning that had consumed Marcus a year ago. Before William left that night, he and Marcus walked outside into the cool California evening. They stood under the stars, and William told Marcus something that would stay with him forever. He said that the greatest honor of his military service was not the medals or recognition, but moments like this, when his example helped someone find their way. William explained that he had not expected Marcus to change. Most people who behaved disrespectfully never thought twice about it, never looked deeper than their own desires. But Marcus had done the hard work of genuine transformation, and that took more courage than William had displayed in any combat situation. Marcus asked William what had made him break protocol that day, what had made him acknowledge Oliver in the midst of duty. The guard smiled and admitted that the child's pure admiration had touched something deep within him, reminded him why he wore the uniform. But seeing Marcus in the background, seeing the stark contrast between mockery and respect, had made the moment even more meaningful. William shared that he had been struggling with his own questions about whether his service mattered, whether the sacrifices were worth it. Then this spoiled young man and this innocent child had appeared on the same morning, creating a perfect lesson about human nature and potential. In acknowledging Oliver, William had also been acknowledging his own renewed faith in the meaning of service. The two men embraced again before William left, promising to stay in touch. Marcus watched the guard walk away, feeling gratitude so deep it was almost painful. 1 year ago he had been a different person entirely, lost and empty despite all his privileges. Now he had purpose, connections, and the knowledge that his life could matter. The following months brought more changes. Marcus enrolled in community college, beginning his formal education in social work. His father, seeing the genuine transformation in his son, gradually came to support the choice. He even began volunteering at the Veterans Center himself, finding unexpected fulfillment in the simple act of service. David, inspired by both Marcus and William, began turning his life around. He started volunteering at the center, helping with younger kids who struggled with anger and direction. The cycle of transformation continued, each person touched by service reaching back to help others climb the same path. Marcus's social media, once filled with pointless stunts and empty flexing, became a platform for sharing stories from the Veterans Center and encouraging others to volunteer. The viral video of his behavior at the palace remained online, but now it was often shared alongside updates about his transformation, becoming a story of redemption rather than just mockery. One evening, Marcus was working in the center's kitchen when a young man approached him nervously. The visitor was about Marcus's age, well-dressed and clearly uncomfortable in the modest surroundings. He explained that he had seen Marcus's story online, how he had changed after the incident in London. He admitted that he saw himself in the old Marcus, recognized the same emptiness and desperate seeking for meaning. Marcus set down his knife and invited the young man to help him chop vegetables. As they worked side by side, Marcus shared his journey, just as Tom had shared with him, just as William had shared with them both. He explained that change was possible but difficult, that it required humility and commitment, that the rewards were deeper and more lasting than anything money could buy. The young man listened, asking questions, slowly relaxing into the work. By the end of the evening, he had signed up to volunteer. Marcus added his name to the schedule, feeling the profound satisfaction of passing forward the gift he had been given. 2 years after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Marcus graduated with his associate degree in social work. The ceremony was small and modest, nothing like the elaborate private school graduation his parents had hosted years before. But this time, Marcus was surrounded by people who knew him, really knew him, and were proud of who he had become. William sent a video message that was played at the celebration. He congratulated Marcus on his achievement and reminded him that education was just another tool for service. The guard shared that he had been promoted and was now working with veterans organizations across Europe, spreading the same message of purpose through service that had connected him with Marcus. Oliver also sent a message, now a confident 8-year-old who still dreamed of becoming a guard. He told Marcus he was proud of him for becoming a helper, for showing that people could change. The boy's words, simple and sincere, touched everyone present. Marcus began working full-time at the Veterans Center, using his education to expand their youth programs. He developed a curriculum specifically for privileged young people struggling with purpose. Using his own story as a teaching tool, he was brutally honest about his failures, never sugarcoating the ugliness of his former behavior, always emphasizing the work required for genuine change. His relationship with his parents had transformed completely. They were no longer connected by money and obligation, but by mutual respect and shared values. His mother worked alongside him regularly at the center, finding in service the fulfillment that luxury had never provided. His father, though still running his businesses, approached his work differently now, asking not just how to profit,